Hey,
Hey, what's up?
I'm Sarah.
I'm Francesca, and this is my dear friend, Vicki Shepard.
Hi there.
So Vicki and I have actually been friends since we were born. I'm 13 days older than her, and our moms were best friends. And so literally my bosom buddy.
Sure.
Can you use that term? Bosom? Yeah.
Why
whatever.
not?
Let's just pass it over. Yeah, bosoms. So, okay, and Vicki, so like I think I've talked about this before in the podcast, like in my estimation of like the social hierarchy, like the top slots are like war correspondent, but then even above that is Vicki, because Vicki is like, this is in my mind. So Vicki has worked in the humanitarian sector in some of the, let's just say, worst places in the world, right? Like South Sudan, Syria, like most challenging places in the world. Literally like wearing leather jackets, smoking cigs. One time she nearly died because she got bombed.
That's not
That's
true.
not true. See, this is I'm glad we're doing like an initial fact check, because literally I've told that story to so many people. Okay, you weren't driving in a car somewhere and then it got bombed and your coworker died?
I was in a car accident and my coworker died, but we didn't get bombed.
Oh shit.
Francesca.
Francesca is not a reliable narrator sometimes about herself, but also stories that happen to loved ones of hers.
Oh wow, you were in a car accident. Where were you?
I was in Kenya, and we were we were in a rural part of the country, driving from a refugee camp back towards the town, but like a really small town called Lodwar. And it was like a mechanical error. Like the driver just all of a sudden, like the steering pin disconnected and he couldn't steer the car anymore. And these are like rough, unpaved roads.
These are not white people roads.
They're not white people roads.
They're not American roads. Yeah.
No,
not Eisenhower
I was going to say
roads.
not those quality American roads that we have here.
Yeah. LOL, we're just kidding. The infrastructure's disintegrating before our very eyes.
Yeah.
And yeah, the car flipped and went off the road, and my colleague Dominic died.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
So like somebody with a real job,
Thank you.
Yeah.
not an email job. This is a woman who does not have an email job.
It's also still sometimes an email job. Just to, like, I just want to not, I want to demystify certain aspects.
Okay, so occasionally between some of the most war-torn and stricken parts of the world, you occasionally write emails.
We send more emails than you would think, considering what's happening in the places where we're working. That's what I would say.
Can you tell us what your job is?
Sure. I'm currently not working.
Okay.
But my last series of jobs have been working in both like in refugee settings and working in what we call protection, which is sort of like the human rights framework for displaced people or people experiencing conflict. And that's usually about how they access services, right? So how they can access services if they're refugees in a country of asylum, or how they can access services in their own country when they've been displaced.
Mm-hmm.
Displaced sounds like a polite term.
Sure. Refugees, right? I think the reason refugees, but also the terminology for people who have been forced to leave their homes but are unable maybe to leave their country, like borders are closed, whatever, is internally displaced person. A little bit of a mouthful.
Internally displaced person.
Yeah.
Sounds like kind of like a gastric problem.
It's not a great term, and I think, obviously y'all can go into how I feel generally about the sector, but like one of the things we're definitely terrible at is sort of, I don't want to say like branding, but we spend a lot of time with how things are named and called, and then we'll occasionally be like, ooh, that sounds a little like patronizing or unclear what we're actually trying to say, right? Which can also be harmful when like you're trying to get funds or you're trying to explain to someone who's not within that field of work what you do, like just now.
But but can you give us like a list of the countries or the populations you've worked with in the past like 20 years?
Sure. Most recently, I was in Turkey. So Turkey at the time, for a long time, hosts the largest refugee population in the world post Syrian civil war starting. And so but there's not just Syrian refugees in Turkey, so Syrian, Iranians, Iraqi, Afghan primarily, but also refugees from, I would say, the entire continent of Africa. Before that, I was working on the humanitarian response to the Syrian civil war, so that was working with displaced Syrians who were still within Syria. I previously worked in South Sudan with Sudanese refugees as well as displaced South Sudanese.
Yeah.
And in Kenya with, at the time, that was pre-Syria, so that was when they had some of the largest refugee communities in the world, primarily Somali, but also Eritrean, Ethiopian, Congolese. Just a smorgasbord.
People who are having a hard time.
Yeah, but...
Or is that not true?
No, of course. I mean, people who have been forced to leave their homes. And I think like one of the things that I find really difficult in discourse around these communities is that I always sort of want to like shake people and be like, just think about what it would take for you to do that, right? Like, you know, like, and without knowing what's coming after, right? Like to have to like leave your home, leave your stuff, leave your community, your friends, your whole, you know, support structure. You know, it's not someone who wakes up and it's like, you know what I feel like doing today? Trying to go through Libya to get to Europe. Like that's not that's not a light decision.
Yeah.
And I think, I think about this a lot, about the discourse even about immigration in the U.S. too, right? The factors that are driving or contributing to people's decision-making are not minimal, and I think they get minimized a lot.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
But yeah, like, the communities we were working with were not having a good time.
Yeah, there's, like, are poverty levels high?
It depends. I mean, I think, you know, in both of the yes and, right? I mean, some of the conversations... And I think this is probably where humanitarian sector hasn't done as well in terms of like picking up speed. But you know, most of these communities would like to be able to work and contribute to economies, right? But similarly, right, a lot of them don't have the right to work or the right to work formally. So you end up having these like shadow economies in countries. Like when I worked in Kenya, and again, this was over a decade ago, so the laws have changed. But at the time, the refugees didn't have a right to work, but they of course were working, so it's just, you know, a huge amount of income basically generated that was not being taxed and not, you know, contributing, let's say, to what could be used by the Kenyan government to develop, you know, different parts of their country. So I think it's like yes and no, right? It's not necessarily like sometimes yes, people are in extremely desperate situations, right? Especially when the conflict is active or they remain in conflict, right? I think most recently, of course, like we all see the images in Gaza. That's like, you know.
That's a very active conflict zone.
Very active conflict zone.
Do they grade it like with different colors?
Not with different colors, but they have levels.
Yeah. Is that like the highest?
It's the highest, yeah. It would be like an L3.
An L3.
Yeah.
It doesn't get worse than an L3.
No, not yet. I mean, you know.
Yeah.
In Syria, at the height of the Syrian civil war, that was also an L3 situation?
Yeah.
Okay.
That basically, what that means is that the humanitarian architecture is activated to do a more coordinated response, right? So different organizations and UN agencies come together to make sure that, to try to get up the systems working as best possible, whether that's health, food, protection, like the work I was doing, you know, shelter. It all is, the effort is to make it more coordinated so that more people can receive the services.
And, sorry, no, you go, Sarah.
Go ahead.
Basically, I was just saying that, like, I was going to say the reason that we're having Vicky on is to kind of talk more generally about the humanitarian sector and also specifically just kind of in the context of like USAID being cut off. So should I just like give a brief outline of what USAID is? Would that be helpful?
Sure.
Okay. So it started in 1961. It was like the idea sort of being to help like build American soft power. And it is kind of the biggest things they've worked on are been like eradicating diseases like smallpox and polio and AIDS. And like the idea being that there's like these 3D development pillars of the United States, right? Which is like diplomacy, development, and defense, and USAID is the largest of the development duties. And then, but the idea is, just to give you a sense of numbers, in 2023, which is the last year I think they have on record of like full spending, $72 billion was spent by the U.S. So we're talking like money.
Big money.
Serious money.
Money, but in comparison to the U.S. budget,
Small change.
I think it's a small percentage
Very
of
small.
the annual budget of the United States of
Oh
America.
yeah, 0.07%.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
And I think that was part of the argument that started to come out, right, when the announcements that they were basically cutting all of the USAID funding was, you know, that was one of the counterpoints that obviously didn't play in that sense. But it was
Yeah.
like, this is actually a very
Small amount of money.
portion of like your tax dollars, right?
Yeah,
On the
and if you also
spectrum
think
of
about it in
things.
terms of like, okay, we're atoning for our sins here. For American hegemony, is 72 billion that high of a price to pay to try to gain back a little bit of the world's goodwill? I don't know. I don't really know how you put a price on that, but
Well, in your experience, do you feel like it is goodwill?
So this is something I feel like a little bit mixed with, right? In the sense of, I think it's also like a yes and. So I do think probably it underlying some of this was like this idea of sort of like altruism and wanting to like help others. But what I sort of found humorous during the conversations in January and February when the announcements about the basically shutting down of USAID were coming out were exactly that conversation of like, but this is how we, like, this is our soft power. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, you're sort of putting something on the table that was always tried to be presented slightly differently.
Totally.
Right? In the sense of it was always meant more like, look how kind, like, and USAID packaging always says like, from the American people on it.
Right. This food that you need, these
Uh-huh.
vaccines that you need, you know who you should be so grateful to? America.
And so, and I think there's elements of that there too, but of course it was. I mean, it is used, and this is not exclusive to USAID. The most governments that participate in humanitarian and development assistance are doing that in parallel to other things they're trying to do, right? In that
Yeah.
country or in that region. It's never like out of the goodness of our heart.
Yeah.
So I do think, and that's not to speak about the effectiveness of programs. Like you were just listing huge achievements. I mean, the Ebola response in West Africa, USAID was massively involved in.
Yeah.
Right? And so we're talking about things that could have had, not that that wasn't catastrophic on its
Yes,
own, but
yes, yes.
things that could have had much wider reach
Yeah.
in ways. So I do think, for me, the question, and I was having this conversation with a colleague of mine, and I'm genuinely curious actually to hear from you both, is like, I actually just don't think your average person cares whether or not like the US provides that type of service or support. Because when all of this was happening, NGOs and UN agencies were doing all of this press to try to say like, write to your Congress people, let them know you want USAID to stay. And I was like, I don't know how high that is on the list for your average person.
Yeah, where's the political will?
Right.
So can I ask, before we get to that, were you working with organizations that were funded by USAID?
I was,
Aid?
yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Most organizations are like multi-donor. The last organization I worked for was a UN agency, and their funding structure is very different than like an NGO funding structure.
And an NGO is a non-governmental organization, for those who
See,
don't know.
there I am with my acronyms. But yes, in short, yes. My previous job, yes. Past jobs, yes, as well. And in I finished my last role in December, but for sure the impact has been massive. A lot of people I know have lost their jobs, will continue to lose their jobs, and that's not to speak of obviously like the actual services that were being provided that will not be provided any
So
longer.
just this is from a mathematician who was tracking this from, I believe, Penn, I want to say, although I could be, no, Boston University. The PEPFAR, which is a program that PEPFAR, that Bush Jr. started to help like an AIDS response, I believe specifically in Africa, right? Was considered like hugely successful, obviously bipartisan. Now, because of that funding being cut, this mathematician's estimate that one adult will die every 3 minutes and one child will die every 31 minutes because of the end of that funding.
Yeah, even I've seen some documentation about what's happening in Sudan, which is, has been experiencing for many years a lot of internal, and external, but, conflict, and because of that, massive disruption on like basic infrastructure and services, including like food. So there's a major risk of famine, and yeah, the statistics they're putting out about the number of children in Sudan that will likely die because of the lack of assistance is staggering.
And USAID had been giving assistance to Sudanese children specifically. Yeah, so I just think that like, I hear you about how like there's people don't care and there's no political will. I guess I'm a bleeding heart. I identify as a bleeding heart, and I do believe that the U.S. should make some attempt at restitution for all the power that they wield in the world. So I would say that I do support the theoretical idea of giving assistance, and like a lot of assistance to those who are less fortunate, which I think is just, a Christian idea, and everybody wants to claim now that we live in a Christian nation. So I'm like, why don't you put your money where your mouth is, But I guess that thing that you sent me, Sarah, that video from Al Jazeera, can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I forgot her name, but I was watching the former ambassador of the African Union. Do you know her name? No.
It's hella long.
She was speaking on Al Jazeera about how she felt like a lot of African leaders were not upset that U.S. aid was ending, and that it had been for a long time used to control Africa.
And topple governments that they didn't like. And
Yeah, I mean, I think for many countries, if you ask whether it's their heads of states or more of their like heads of the equivalent ministry that would be like dealing with that type of structure, and that's not super surprising to me, right? Because none of this is unconditional money, right? It's not that anyone shows up, and that's the same that goes to NGOs or to UN agencies. Like, it's not that they're like, here's $40 million, best of luck on restoring your, farming infrastructure that was destroyed in a flood. That's not how it works, right? There's like very specific requirements, and this was sort of the part, I think, where with Doge.
Yeah.
I think people always tell me I mispronounce Elon Musk's name, so
Elon.
See?
Elon Musk, I really think that with his daytime talk show.
Excuse me, Elon. This whole conversation about how inefficient, these systems are, and like there's so much waste, etc. It's not to say that these big systems, I mean, many of these organizations, the UN and I'm sure USAID, they really do function like a government, right? So they are bureaucratic, they are heavy, but within all of that process are massive amounts of like checks and balances, right? Like and a USAID contract is going to be like hundreds of pages long that an organization is going to have to like comply with, what their reporting is, what they have to show, visibility. I mean, it's a massive contractual agreement. So the idea that it's just kind of like, I think in his mind,
freely given.
And also just sort of like, who knows, rainbow sunshine, whatever the claim was about like, millions of condoms going somewhere or something. And
millions of condoms going to Gaza.
Gaza.
Yeah, and you're like, this is, again, like not how
Although
it's
people
functioning.
are always bitching about the Palestinians' birth rate, so like, and like how they have such high birth rates and how Israel wishes that weren't so. So it kind of tracks with the condoms to Palestine, no?
But I just don't think it happened.
No, I know, totally. But I just like, I
Right.
kind of understand where it's coming from.
I mean, it's not to say that like condoms are not part of these, like, right? Like a lot
Yeah.
of times, because there is a lot of like sexual violence in conflict and in displacement, like there are going to be.
But no, who's going to throw a wrapper on it before raping someone? I mean, is that the idea?
That's not necessarily the idea, but I'm just saying that there's a lot of like sexual reproductive health that happens in humanitarian settings too.
Got it,
So
okay.
like on more of the like preventative side, there would be like
Yeah.
kits with condoms provided. That's not an outlandish thing.
Got it.
I think it's more that like the millions of dollars that were
Right.
allegedly spent on condoms is like probably not what happened.
Well, I know that some of the things that they said that U.S. aid funded were just not true. Like the transgender opera. I think there was like an opera with a gay character, and it was actually funded by like the State Department in that country. But something else I was reading about was that they keep throwing around this like 12 cents to the dollar. That's how much are actually going to the recipients in need. And what I understand, which like maybe you can speak to from your experience, is that part of the inefficiency is built in by both what you were saying, like the bureaucracy, which small groups on the ground cannot comply with those requirements, as well as congressional mandates to have, for example, food aid sourced in the U.S.
Correct.
So you actually have U.S. farmers who
Correct.
are providing wheat and et cetera.
Soy.
And that was one of the those were like some of the first contracts that got like turned back.
I know.
on,
I mean, I think
right?
farmers
Because
are pretty. Oh, they got turned back on.
Yeah, because,
farmers
like-
were like, "Fuck you, we need money. We're already hurting so bad here."
Well, and again, it just shows like how little information was held by like decision makers
Yeah.
in Doge, and I mean in that sense, right? Like just from a like getting political points type of thing, like that wouldn't have been the move in any way, because yes, a huge amount of the food assistance, if not all, is basically like excess farm
American,
food from.
yeah, that they're having a really hard time moving anyway because of fucking fair trade, man. You know what I mean?
But yes, and the other point you're speaking to is 100% correct as well, right? So a lot of this funding is not as accessible to like smaller community groups because the requirements that you would need to like meet the threshold of, you know, sort of accountability, let's say, is not necessarily going to be the same way like a local organization would structure themselves, right? You know, you have, and all of it is around the idea of like preventing fraud and misuse of funds, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole sort of idea behind this kind of like heavy process. Can I speak to like if it's really 12 cents to the dollar? I would have no idea how they came up with that. The point of, does all of the money that USAID provides go directly to the individuals who need assistance? No, right? Because like that's even like my salary gets paid by part of that.
Of course,
right?
there's overhead, but I think that the myth that they were promoting were like, okay, where does this 88% go? And the answer is like to American charities and organizations that then grant the charity in Burkina Faso.
Right, or directly provide the service.
Yeah.
Right, like, or have their local team there that's running a health clinic or providing support to get, you know, school systems more solidified in terms of like, you know, common curricular things like that. Yeah, it's not, you know, again, I think the idea that 88% was just like floating around or going into people's pockets, or again, like I'm not sure what their argument was or like where they thought it was, but it's not that. It may not be as like, you know, one-to-one as they allegedly would like it to be, right? Like in the sense of like, here, you know, give $1, you get $1, but that's
just how the world works.
Yeah, it's
baby.
just like built into the system.
There's always friction.
And we can talk about whether or not that system should continue as is, but like,
I mean, I guess like this idea of like, okay, it was presented as egalitarian for a long time. Then when it's taken away, people were like, but yo, this is our soft power.
Mm-hmm.
And then people saying like that woman whose name is Hella Long, being like, we don't want the African nations. I think she was speaking like pretty generally, right? She was like, don't want that help because it's always conditioned and often it has to do with meddling in our political systems. So I guess my question that I want to talk about is like, do we have an ethical obligation to do this? And then do we have a real world obligation to do this? Like, is it a good idea? I don't know.
I mean, I would start with for me, ethically, yes, in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's sort of, I don't know, I've been reflecting about this a lot because I think I mentioned this to you on the phone. I'm having my own sort of reflection, let's say, about my participation in this work and then the system more broadly and kind of thinking about if it's something I want to continue. I do think being able to assist people who are in crisis and not just in your own backyard, whether or not that's even happening here is a different conversation, right? But I do think there's a moral imperative there. And I think it's important because I think, for me, you know, all human beings deserve to live in like dignity and safety, right? So that's my personal opinion.
As America, is it our obligation to uphold that dignity and safety of others?
I think we can certainly help because we're doing a lot to take that away with our other, you know, hand, right? So, but it's extremely complicated, right? I mean, I think, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
but I
it's
think
fine.
this is where what's making the humanitarian system a little bit stuck right now is because of how funding exists, generally speaking, primarily from big states, the independence element and the ability to sort of go in and try to work with communities and let them kind of lead with what they need, that's not what happens in practice all the time. Yes, they're consulted, they're involved, but at the end of the day, you know, a donor is still going to be like, so we're not going to do cash because we're too worried about, you know, fraud, so we're going to be giving, you know, kits. And then the kits turn up in the market and everyone gets mad because people are selling the kits. And it's like, well, like, people want cash.
Yeah.
Because they're human beings with agency and would like to make a decision for themselves. So I think, you know, there's an element of the system is a little bit too what was too big to fail? Was it Enron? Was it the banks?
Either or.
Whoever. But like, it's a little bit similar now, right? The system has become big. There's a lot of trying to do almost too many things at once, right? So, moving from like just straight up response to emergencies to getting into like, now we're gonna like help you write legislation. And I think, and all of that comes with conditions from donor governments, traditionally who are states, traditionally Western states, who do, and I think work is obviously being done, but generally come, I think, from a sort of paternalistic perspective as well, right? Like, we're here to help you because you don't know how to do this, which, again, like totally removes the dignity of the people that you're trying to actually assist.
Yeah, and I wonder if, like, as this former ambassador was saying, that this is an opportunity for those countries to, take back some of their agency that has been, that the U.S. has kind of enabled this dependence, or if it'll be just an opportunity for a country like China to come in and just use it as an opportunity for them to gain power in that region.
I mean, what I would love to see would obviously be like the former. Like, I think it would be cool if, countries, and even, there's a ton of, because this work has been happening for so long, there's also a ton of really good kind of local knowledge and structure in a lot of these places where, like, there may not be the same volume of resources, perhaps, that's coming from, like, an EU or the US, but there are still resources that could be, that could come together to help them work on sort of a more, I want to say, like, in-house way of responding to disaster or emergency. Now, the big caveat and, like, the reason that you have these large international organizations, like the different UN agencies, is because oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, governments are either like unable or unwilling to do some of that work and response, right? Especially if it's like an internal conflict, or even if it's...
An internal conflict means literally a civil war.
Yeah, or just like, it can be like a small uprising in a corner, right? It doesn't have to be like full-fledged.
Okay.
But even sometimes in like natural disasters, right? Like maybe the natural disaster happens in a part of the country that's like the opposition stronghold. Like maybe you're going to be like just a little bit slower to provide response. Or maybe it's a poor part of the country, so you're going to kind of not prioritize it in the same way you would prioritize it if it happened in like a major metropolitan area.
And I mean, also, like, we can see even in this country that the government's not, there's no incentive for the government to, like, support the poorest of the poor because there's no money to be made. So it's not far off to think of how that happens in other countries, as we're going to cut Medicaid care any day now.
But it is interesting that the richest states in the United States are the ones that, like, are donor states, like California, and they give their tax base to, like, poor, like, states like Mississippi, which can't pay their own way with taxes. But I think that's more not a function of helping poor people and more a function of maintaining Republican votes. You know what I mean? But it's kind of crazy to think about that way. I guess do you remember how, like, 7 years ago there was a lot of conversation about universal basic income and they rolled out a pilot program? Where was it? I want to say Kenya, but I could be wrong.
I think you're wrong.
Okay.
But, like, am I going to be able to remember? Yeah, like, I'm going to say maybe it was, like, Rwanda, Uganda. Like,
okay.
Close, but I will
I'm
need to fact check where that happened.
What happened? And the people were, like, really stoked about the idea of, like, the aid was literally just get them phones to get the money on the phone to get $1,000 a month. I don't think it was 1,000 because I think it would be way lower.
Right, it would be adjusted to, like, market rate.
But, like, what happened to that movement? Because that's an idea of, like, that's just a giving where you're just like, yo, dude, here you go. You know what I mean?
It's a great question, and I don't know. We should look and go back and see what actually happened there.
Because, like, spiritually, man, like, if you give a gift, like, my mom taught me this. She was like, if you give someone money on the street, like, you don't get to be like, hey, don't smoke crack with that. You know what I mean?
I was just thinking about this morning because I was sitting outside because I'm currently not working, I'm really, like, around my neighborhood in Bed-Stuy. Like, I've become that person. And so I was sitting outside my favorite bakery, and this woman was having this conversation with this man who was, like, talking about how he was, like, living in a shelter and wanted money. And she kept being like, I'll buy you a croissant, but I can't give you money. And I was like, he doesn't want a croissant. He wants $5. And like give if you don't have, I didn't have any cash, right? So I'm not trying to shame this person in that sense, but he's not asking you to buy him food in the bakery, right? Which sometimes people do too, right? He's asking for cash, and that's like, it's like not a value judgment. Like, if you have cash, you can give it to him. You don't have cash, okay, right? But it's not for you to try to sort of tell him what to do. And I think, and this is, I mean, that's a good example because I think about this a lot with humanitarian assistance as well. Like, part of why I'm sure this former ambassador, I mean, part of her reflection, she's probably talking about a higher level of like governments directing other governments. But even at an individual personal level, it can feel really dehumanizing, actually, to like receive assistance that doesn't meet your needs, actually, right?
I'm sure.
And like to be like told, like to be in places where everyone's like, cash would be great, and it's like, oh, we don't trust you because you've been displaced, so we somehow think you can't make decisions that are best for you or your family. So here's a standard kit with like low quality blankets and sheets and like, you know, cups.
Shit you don't need.
Right.
You just need that cold hard cash.
Again, for me, it's a core part about being a human is agency, right? Like, I think about this with my toddler all the time. I like think about how little choice he has about so many things. So when he like gets to make a choice, I really sort of like try to honor that for him, because I realize like a lot of his day is being told what to do in reality, right? In school, whatever. And so, yeah, like, you know, I think just because someone has lost their house in a flood or left their country because of a civil war, like, it doesn't mean all of a sudden they lose the right to make choices about their lives.
Yeah, I mean, but I feel like America's thing is sort of like, y'all don't get to make choices.
Yeah, like, what did RFK just do? He said that, like, people can't use food stamps to buy candy bars.
Sure. Perfect.
Which
Thank
is
you.
like, okay, like, you want to buy your kid a Snickers bar, like, you know, and you can't because RFK said no.
I saw that, but in relation to soda, and I was like, that's right. Because I've never drank soda. Do you know what I mean? So.
Is that a true statement?
I've had maybe 5 cans of soda
This
in
is
my
what I'm
whole
talking about
life.
when I say unreliable narrator. Like, I just want to know. Like, it may be true. I just want to know
I've
if
maybe
that's
had
true.
like 5 Coca-Colas in
Okay.
my whole life.
And, like, good for you. But, like, do Americans deserve the dignity of deciding whether or not they're going to drink a Coca-Cola? Like,
Yes.
But then think about it from this perspective. What if there was legislation around these high fructose, high sugar beverages that are driving up diabetes? Would it be okay for there to be legislation passed to ban those foods?
no, because we live in America.
So you want the red dye in those Fruit Loops?
I mean, like,
Even though in Canada, they don't have that dye. Those are some, like,
why?
Because they're fucking toxic as shit.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, then, yeah, if it's going to be like, if it's going to cause cancer or something and they know that and they're feeding it to kids.
Well, literally so much of the shit processed food that they feed to kids, they're clear. They can't even sell that shit in the EU. I mean, we are like, it's also true with like beauty products and shampoos and stuff. The shit that they put in American products is so much more gnarly and untested than they do in Europe. It's crazy.
Is it just because we don't? Sorry, this is it.
No.
We don't have the same level of legislation or regulation around it, or like?
It's that, and it's also because of the lobbying power of
okay.
these major corporations who don't want limits put on
Sure.
the fucking toxic ass chemical. Literally, Roundup settled with a class action lawsuit for $4 billion, and they can still sell it, and they admitted no wrong. And you can go buy it. There's like walls of Roundup every time you go to Home Depot.
I think it's two different things. It's like, one, should these products be accessible on the market, right? Which I think is a valid conversation to have. But if they are accessible on the
Yes,
market,
okay.
being like, poor people can't buy them because it's bad for their health is such a patronizing,
Okay.
insulting.
100% agree with you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And again, I think that's like the frustration that it's not the only frustration, and that's not the only challenge with like humanitarian system, but that's a big element of it, right? Is people feeling like all of their choices are removed in certain settings, and it's like, well, I didn't choose in the sense of like, you know, to like be born in a place that has like a crazy dictatorship that now there's an active civil war, you know, like, but now I have to, like, I remember. This was a really long time ago, and again, I'm sure that system has changed, but I remember working with I'm not going to name the refugee community, but I'm working with the refugee community, and they kept talking about that the food assistance they were receiving was all rice, and they were, like, cooked with pasta traditionally, and they were super frustrated about this, and it was like, and again, it was like a circular conversation because, of course, like the food organizations were like, yeah, this is what we have. Like, this is what we provide. It's like standard package. And you're like,
But these people don't fucking like rice,
right.
man.
It's like not what they cook with.
Can you imagine just like having to eat rice for every meal? Like,
I'm hella into rice, so that sounds like a gift
Okay,
to
but
me.
but if it came in a giant, like,
Sack that said thank you from the American people.
yeah, then you would not enjoy eating that rice.
But also, like, what if you weren't hella into rice? And
Totally.
then
If I had to eat pasta every day, I'd fucking shoot myself.
I'm the opposite. Me, I would just like,
Yeah.
You're
you know,
Italian.
yeah, and bury me in a bowl
Bury
of pasta.
me in a bowl
It's fine.
of spaghetti.
Yeah, it's fine. But like, I would, right, but like, it's that total removal of choice, and basically telling people like, deal with it, right? Like, this is what you get. You're like, what?
Can I ask what called you to that
Mhm.
work? Like, how did you end up in this sector?
It's such a good question, and I don't
She
totally.
just wanted to get the hell out of San Francisco, man.
Maybe. No, I mean, okay, when I graduated college, I was living in New York, and I was working at like a think tank, basically, like a policy think tank that worked with the UN. And it was super interesting, but I also sort of thought, like, I don't really like know, like, I've never seen any of this policy in action, right? Like, I've never experienced the policy we talk about in person. So I sort of thought I should do that if I wanted to keep working in the realm of policy.
That's a very responsible thought
Thank
that
you.
most people probably don't have.
Well, and it started as kind of a joke too. Like, I was telling you've been to that apartment. We had this really great apartment in the East
Yeah,
Village.
Vicky would never hang out with me back then. She always was hanging out with her cool friends. But yes, I was there once.
Again, it's not true.
Was that before or after you were bombed?
Yeah, it was actually the same day.
Sorry.
In New York City.
Just really quickly, is your sound going in and out or being
I think
weird?
it's just when I'm really loud and obnoxious.
But you guys aren't having problems. I think it might just be my headphones. It's fine. I just
no,
want-
sometimes when I laugh really loud, it kind of like goes out because it's like, bitch,
Well,
shut up.
I'm just
See what I mean?
realizing my bracelets are so noisy, and I'm very
No, I
sorry.
kinda like
I
it.
kind of like
Yeah.
it's like we're in the souk or
Yeah,
something.
well, my mom's always like, it's like having a cat in the house. Like, you just like always know when you're moving around. I was like, okay, thank you, Corolla. Highest of compliments.
I love your mom.
I love her too.
When did we start? No, we're good.
Okay, I'll cut that out. But so sorry. So your apartment in New York.
Yes.
I was like telling my roommates to keep the apartment. Like, I was like, I'm gonna do this for a year, then I'm gonna come back and be like working at the UN, you know, on 42nd, like living my best life,
With
basically.
cocktails, the high life.
Yeah, living a fancy life. And so I got this fellowship. My boss at the time in New York who's a wonderful person, was like, hey, I think you should like check this program out. And I received a fellowship, and I was placed with an NGO in Kenya, and I started working more on more on like the fundraising side, like writing proposals, grants, stuff like that, working with the technical teams, and I loved it. Like, I thought it was like really interesting and, yeah, I think important work to do. And so then I sort of, I don't know, I always say like sort of right place, right time. I was there when they got a big grant to start programming for an urban refugee community in Nairobi, and because I had been like an intern, I'd have like a lot of random tasks, like running the adult literacy program in that neighborhood in Nairobi. So they were like,
As a what, 23-year-old?
like 25 maybe. Luckily, I'm.
That's some paternalism right there.
Well, this is my husband's number one comment about like my husband, who is not a white person. And he's like, you all just start as interns, and then like because you're native English speakers, you're like directing shit 3 days later, which was not exactly my journey, but like I understand his critique in that sense too. And this is, again, like there's a lot that's wrapped up in this.
I'm sorry, this is such a dumb question,
No.
but is English the main language in Kenya?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean English and Kiswahili. So like
Okay.
because of
Is Kiswahili different than just regular Swahili?
it's just like the formal name, I think.
Oh, okay, cool.
I was about to say, because of everyone's fave, colonialism. Obviously, like English.
Shout out colonialism.
Yeah, love you, many blessings. Another system deeply linked to the humanitarian system too. But like, yeah, English was like taught, right, like in schools because it was a British colony. They had to, but like the communities will all speak Kiswahili, and then different languages of the major tribes in the country.
That's so cool. Like, Americans are so dumb. I was
So
talking to my
dumb.
South African friend, our South African
Yeah,
friend.
yeah, yeah.
and
Ellen?
Sorry?
I said Ellen.
Not Elon
Not
Musk.
Ellen Musk. No.
No, thankfully not. And he was like, yeah, I like speak 7 languages. And I was like, that's
So tight.
It's so confusing when you're
You
like,
speak some languages though, bro.
yeah, but not like
Not like that.
according to Francesca. You
Yeah, obviously I
speak-
speak 20 languages
Yeah.
according to Francesca, actually.
Literally, remember that movie with Angelina Jolie, and she's like a humanitarian worker with like the airplane, and she's like really hot.
Sure.
Do you know,
That's what is that what you think I'm
literally what
doing?
I thought you were doing for like 15 years.
Yeah.
And I was like, this bitch will never call me back. But I was like, I'll forgive her because she's chain smoking cigs, looking out over the savannah, saving lives.
Yeah, just like flying really low and picking people up out of their misery. Yeah, it's me and Jolie together. Yeah, I do love her, honestly. So like, can't shame her in that way.
No.
Totally.
I don't know what.
Wait, I want to know.
Oh,
Okay, 'cause
yeah.
I remember you told me. I don't know if you were in Nairobi this time. I was really shocked when you told me the story about like just how plush and tight the places where you got to stay were.
Sure.
Where like there would be like 3 levels of security, and you maybe this is also me and my unreliable.
This is
narrator. But like you would go through all these checkpoints, and then like. In my vision, you were like it was like in the middle of a slum, but then you enter this like paradise where there's like cut mangoes waiting for you and somebody like palm fronding you. You know what I mean? But that's not true, is it?
No, but I like again. It's like a good like it's again shout out to colonialism again and that like really nice image of like what it's like to like live on the dark continent, right? No, I mean Kenya is one of my favorite places I've ever had like the privilege of living. It's a beautiful country. It's a lot of fun, lots to see and do, and yeah, it is insanely beautiful. But because, in this sense, like this sort of inverse, like there's a lot of concern, I would say, about like the security of like a white woman there, right? Which like I can't say if that was like true or not, but like yeah, when we lived like people who have resources, whether or not they're white or foreigners or even Kenyans themselves, live behind huge walled structures because there's a lot of theft and crime in the country.
Okay.
But
it wasn't like passing from the hoi polloi into a paradise.
No, the place that I live that reminded me of that is South Africa. Like
Okay.
South Africa, I mean, now
Interesting.
I haven't been in so long, and definitely not since the World Cup, which I'm sure made change. But like you would come through, you would go through like the townships basically on your way in from the airport, and then be in these like very beautiful.
So why
neighborhoods.
would you leave the good life in Kenya to go to literally at the time the worst place in the world, South Sudan?
For South Sudan?
But I mean,
It's tough. No, South Sudan is super tough.
it's been horrible there for a long
It's an
ass
L3.
time.
It's an South
It's been
Sudan.
an L3 for
It's been an L3 for a
decades.
long time. It became an L3 again when I was there after not being an L3.
I remember that.
Again, for me, that was like a little bit of thinking that I needed to like see something more. I always had this perspective of like, I need to know if I really want to do this type of work, right? So I did Kenya for like 2 years, but Kenya is like a very nice place to
Yeah.
live,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of like, and I have this conversation often with people who are like trying to get into this type of work, who are usually like 23-year-olds and like
Who wear tie-dye?
so definitely tie-dye. Which is that you want to make sure that's work that you enjoy doing and not just in like a nice place, because the work itself, while it can be fulfilling, can also be pretty rough at times. Like I did a lot of compartmentalizing over those years just because you have to like really separate. For me at least, I had to separate from things that I was like seeing and hearing from people from like my overall self sometimes.
Can you give it without? We don't want to
Sure.
push too hard on your wounds. Can you give us a little sense of what you mean by rough?
I mean, you're dealing okay, so, when you're working with communities who have been displaced, right, who have fled their homes, people have lost everything, people have been separated from family members, a lot of people have experienced violence, either in their home country or in the country that they fled to, women and girls in particular, there's lots of sexual violence. And then just, like the in one of the last, big emergency, the last L3 that I worked in was Syria. And yeah, that was, I was really good at compartmentalizing then, but that, there was, in some ways, looking at some of the images out of Gaza now are like very reminiscent. They were bombing hospitals. They were not at the same scale. I get like very emotional talking about Gaza now, but yeah, children were killed. Like it was horrific, and you're sitting trying to like muster support and services while like in parallel it's like the worst thing that's happening, right? So you feel sort of, for me in my role when I was working in the Syria operation, I had to like separate because I was responsible for supporting organizations kind of manage their response in those types of settings. But I had to really separate that. And I honestly think becoming a parent is part of the reason that I can't compartmentalize anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I just want to say that, and I want to get your thoughts on this, like pre-October 7th, bombing hospitals have been considered, like that's something that only Assad would do, like a man who would use chemical weapons on his own population. Like that was like kind of beyond the beyond.
Usually, right? Like there was, I think about this a lot actually, because there were like, US has hit hospitals in Afghanistan, like MSF, like Doctors Without Borders hospitals under the Obama administration were bombed in Afghanistan.
Oh, okay.
So, like, generally, yeah, that's, like, just straight war crime. So hospitals are protected under international law. Anyone in a hospital, regardless of their status, right, like combatant or civilian, is protected because it's a hospital where they're receiving treatment for an injury. That's, like, these are, like, early roots of humanitarianism, right, like, with, like, the establishment of the Red Cross and things like that. So, yeah, that's, like, a big no-no.
But I feel like now it's kind of normalized because Israel has bombed so many hospitals that it's like, I think there's sort of this forgetting that in and of itself is an extraordinarily dark turn in terms of what is acceptable action.
And I think, this is going back a little bit to what we were talking about, but like this is what I'm saying, like, do people care? Like this is, I think, part of the thing that I've been thinking about. And I know, for me, it's like definitely a combination of becoming a parent and then the situation in Gaza has sort of like cracked something in me that I'm not totally sure I'm going to be able to repair. Like, and I think it actually affects if I'll ever be able to do this work again, if I'm super frank. Which is exactly what you're saying. Like the bar has been lowered so significantly in terms of, I think, like, what seems to be acceptable, which I just find it horrific, and I find it, and I would be interested to hear from you both on this, because I think being outside of the U.S. at the time.
You were outside of the U.S.?
Yeah, I was in Turkey.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And so we were like awake when it happened actually, and I remember Sammy and I looking at each other, and I think perhaps having lived in the Middle East for a long time, and knowing in general sort of how the Israeli state functions with its neighbors, like it bombs Syria all the time, pre-October, like that's like a regular situation. So we just sort of looked at each other, we're like, this is going to be terrible. I don't think I imagined it would be what it was. Yeah. But seeing the discourse. Now, again, social media, I know is not the best, but what sort of erupted there, and watching people that I know consider themselves like very liberal and like, like anti-racist, like people who were like, posting the black squares for Black Lives Matters and like all of this, Trump is the devil, and then are like, doubling down over and over again in support of the Israeli government. I was like, do we not see, like, for me, if you're like, we're just like talking about like systems of oppression and systematic inequality, and that's the situation of Palestinians in Israel and in occupied territories. So, if we're able, like, we have to be able to apply, or at least interrogate our views if we can't apply those standards consistently, right? If I'm able to like talk about, let's use quotes, right? But if I'm saying like Black Lives Matter and like I understand I'm talking about like systematic racism in the United States, and structural inequality. But then I'm like, but Israel, for me, I'm like, we're missing a very common element here. And what's
the cognitive dissonance
Yeah.
combined with, just Israel is like, with America, it's a huge propaganda machine, and people are, and I see that propaganda and hear it all the time, like listening to the radio, on the news, and there's so much money to convince people that, like, when you see that photo of that amputee, that child amputee, that there's some rationale behind it, that there's like people in charge who are like, it's okay, but it's an insane cognitive dissonance, and it does make me feel crazy.
Yeah.
I think it's gone beyond that. I think it's in pure political nihilism now. I don't think that people feel that there's a justification for the child amputees. I think it's this larger question of like, why the fuck should I care?
Well, and I do think there's this like inability to. I'm gonna really like clearly caveat. I'm talking about white people to like see themselves in Palestinians.
Oh.
And again, that's a broad, sweeping statement. But like, I had this conversation with a friend of mine who was talking about how much she was relating to the mothers of either the Israeli children who had been killed, or the Israeli children who had been taken hostage. And I was like, for sure, right? That's horrific. But I was, but also like, what about
the
Palestinian mothers?
You mean that white people see themselves in Israelis, not Palestinians?
Yeah.
Oh,
and I think it makes it easier to, like, in a way, what you described as well is true, right? There's like a huge machine behind, like, there's a huge machine behind how Israel is portrayed, right? In the U.S. in particular, right? Like there's a very specific story that's told here. But I think, so for me, I was like, but is it like, again, I asked her literally, I was like, is it because like a lot of the women like wear hijabs? Like, is that where you're like not able to connect?
Is that the dissonant?
Is that where you're not able to connect with a woman who's like holding the corpse of her child? And that to me is, I don't understand that, right? I don't understand being able to like hold empathy for one and not the other.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel about Biden and Kamala, but
I have feelings. Sure.
Like I was helping a family member clean out her apartment, and she had these like Kamala socks, and she's someone who like, every time I post about Gaza, she's like heartbreaking, She's calling her representative, but I was like, you got to get rid of these socks. One, because you just like simply don't need them, and two, it's R.I.P. And she was like, I'm not ready to let go of them. And I was like, she's a war criminal. And my aunt goes, who's like bleeding heart liberal, she goes, but she's my war criminal. But I think that's a very common liberal stance. It's like Biden and Kamala, like they're not Trump.
Right.
Sure, they like dropped those bombs,
Right. I mean, my mom was like, went to like a Kamala rally and like was like, do you want a bracelet? And I was like, I would never. And she was, of course, like, why? And I was like, because of her stance on Gaza. That's why. Like, I can talk about all the nice things about her too, but like, that for me is that's a firm line.
Yeah.
I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with trying to talk around something like that.
And you're someone who's like been there and knows what it is.
So the thing is, like, when you hear about the L3 in Gaza, like, you've literally seen what that kind of conflict looks like with your own eyes. It's not a hypothetical.
No, and again, I just think, like, for me, it's even more basic than that, right? Like, in the sense of, regardless of who you identify with or who you feel close to, like, surely you can say that that's not right. Right. I mean, that again, that to me is so basic, but I realize that's like not.
I think people can say that, but then they say, but Israel has a right.
It's really complicated.
It's really complicated, and Israel has a right to defend itself.
It's not black and white.
It's definitely super gray.
But you know what's so interesting is like, so you're saying, like, can we even have empathy for others, which is like kind of even a step before this question, which I think has to do with like USAID in general and the idea of humanitarian, is like, what do we owe the suffering of others? So first we have to acknowledge that they are suffering, and that in and of itself is not right. But then, like, what do we owe?
And before we get into that, I just do want to point out the question that you posed before, like, do people even care? Because I will say that I think that the genocide has been consciousness raising in a lot of people, but like Sudan, you don't hear a peep about it.
But, you know, I would talk to Palestinian friends of mine, and I would say, like, and they were, like, incredible, because I would get, like, very upset and basically, like, cry at them while they were like, yeah, like, my family's in Gaza, right? And I was like, I'm so sorry, I just, like, cannot control my emotions. But I said, like, that point, I fully agree with. Seeing more people just, like, click in, right, to issues that are not, like, in their immediate surrounding, I think is net positive. Obviously, I wish a genocide wasn't the reason that was happening.
Totally.
But, like, cool. I'm, like, super happy to have people, like, a little bit head slightly more above the sand. Definitely, it doesn't happen across the board, right? And this is always, like, you know, I also think that there's an attention span, too, right? Like, I mean, Sudan, maybe because it feels, like, so...
it's literally been going on for decades.
And it's also, like, detached from things, right? Like, maybe we need, like, George Clooney to come back and talk about Sudan, which he used to do. Because that people got very...
People don't have a way into that.
Right. Whereas, like, this, even if I fundamentally disagree with your, like, view on it, like, there's a much easier way into this.
I mean, it's like, I felt like the reason that so many people that I knew got really upset in a new way about Gaza is because it's like, it's just the framing of the story is so clear. It's like they're locked in this tiny piece of land. They cannot leave. They're being told to leave, and they're being bombed. Like, it's very conceptually easy to wrap your head around. Whereas, like, in Sudan, I'm just like, oh fuck, dude, that sounds gnarly. You know what I mean? Like, there's no container for it.
Right.
And I think that that's why the Gaza stuff has, like, brought up so much awareness, is because it's so easy to wrap our brains around.
Well, and I also think you have, like, I mean, even, like, access things, right? You have, like, a lot of Palestinians in Gaza who are, like, fluent in English, create content in English, right? Like, whereas, like, a lot of the Sudanese content is in Arabic, right? Like, and would remain in Arabic, right? So I even think, like, access level, that obviously makes a difference. But I also agree, it's like, there's a more concise, as you said, sort of story, whereas, like, Sudan is like, well, like, how far back do you want to go, right?
Yeah.
Like where do we want to start with the current, you know, and what do we want to focus on?
You know what a light Zionist said to me early on after October 7th? He was like, you know, the reason that all the white people love the Palestinians so much is because they want to engage with the movement without having to deal with black people. Which I thought, interesting idea. I'm just putting that out there. I'm not going to say if I believe it or not. But this person was sort of, like, fired up about, like, why are all these leftists going, like, turning against Israel? It's because of this reason.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with that. What I would like to see more people doing, to be honest, is to, like, connect some of the dots a little bit more, right? Like, in the sense of, like, I'm not expecting everyone to, like, be able to pay attention to everything that's happening around them at all times. Like, again, but even if you're, like, slightly more aware of yourself, like, in your own community, it's a really good starting point. But, like, you know, if Gaza is what's, like, activated you or, like, made you more aware, then, like, yes, like, but do think about, right, like, connections between this type of, like, again, I mean, outside of the actual horrific conflict and violence and genocide, let's also talk about, like, the systems in play, right? Like, they are, like, systematically oppressed. And we actually have our own systems, you know, in the U.S. that replicate elements of that. So, like, let's, like, just try to, like, think about, you know, what we want to try to, like, fight for and what are the different ways to move on those issues.
But how can the white devil ever atone for their sins?
They can't, though.
Do you know what
Right?
I
But, like,
mean?
can they?
Literally,
Like,
sometimes I feel like Malcolm X. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I don't
Francesca.
I don't feel like him, but I, like, hear his voice in my head, and I just sort
You
of feel,
hear Malcolm X's voice in your head.
I just think about, like, how the white devil is, like, a blight upon this earth. Like, I can just, like, I can see that narrative. You know, I'm not saying I'm not saying that the white people are the white devil necessarily. Whatever. It's just an idea, so don't fucking kill me. But I do wonder, like, the sins have been so manifold.
So Francesca's kid is like, or I guess she went through a phase where she was really into witches and wolves.
Well, I mean, she was terrified of them because her grandmother kept telling her about them, and she was fucking couldn't sleep at night, shaking, filled with terror.
Oh.
So she would be like, a wolf is gonna come. A wolf is gonna come. And then she started saying, there are no wolves because the white man came and killed them all. Which obviously she learned from her mother. And I was like, true.
Yeah.
It's true.
That's why there are no more wolves in New York.
Literally the white man. And then she was like, are you the white man? And I was like, no. And she was like, is daddy the white man? And I was like, I mean, that's the truth, bro. There's like 200 wolves. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It sucks.
I just think, I mean, I like don't want to go down this path necessarily, but like, I am somehow still, like, with all of like the terribleness, I am somehow like still inspired when I do see people like showing up and turning out, like, again, even in their own communities. Like, I know not everyone's going to be able to like break the siege, like, you know, in Gaza, but like, I do think, like, you know,
if enough people went,
They're marching through the desert.
It's wild.
they're marching through the Sinai?
Yeah.
They're coming across North Africa, basically. So, like, because, right, like, the border with Rafah is in Egypt.
I literally wrote a play.
I know.
That's crazy.
I know.
They're actually going to do
Yeah.
it? They're going to
Yeah.
pull down the walls of Rafah?
They're marching there.
Holy fuck.
Yeah.
Life just imitates art. I'm kidding.
And they said they were inspired by your
Yeah.
play.
They've all read it. There's a few notes, but they liked it.
I took a covert video of the reading in this apartment, sent it to all of the organizers.
This is why
Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, we
Yeah.
just spammed them with
This
it.
is why white people are the white devil, because they're fucking delusional, like me, you know?
Well, so I actually, on a personal note, I went to the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown to do international development, inspired by 2 or 3 experiences I had in high school where I went with my Catholic school to on one trip to Honduras and one trip to the Dominican Republic. And we stayed in orphanages and, like, quote unquote, helped out by like eating their food and like maybe painting one room. Like,
Sure.
obviously the Hondurans and the Dominicans can paint. I
Right,
don't
like,
know.
they didn't need, like, high schoolers from the U.S. to do that for
Oh
them.
my
Sure.
God.
Totally.
I did a similar thing, actually, in high school. You just reminded me. Yeah.
And the Honduras experience was amazing. We stayed at this orphanage run by these nuns. The food was amazing. There were all these teenage boys in the orphanage. So we were having a
Time of your
ball.
life.
Yeah. The Dominican one was a little bleak because it was state run and it was all girls.
No fun.
So it felt a little bit like being in prison, but I did come away from these experiences being like talking about what do we owe the suffering of others, being like, there are people who are less fortunate than me and I need to help them. You know, like complete white savior vibes.
I mean, we did not even get into that, but, like, that's, like, a whole part of the humanitarian structure that I think is, like, very difficult for it to
Everybody wants to
overcome.
be a savior, man. They want to save their drunk girlfriend. They want to save their, you know what I mean? They want to save somebody from a fire. That shit feels good. But, I mean, but who's left? So if USAID is gone, if the Gates Foundation is shutting down, is literally the Catholic Church?
Wait, I actually want to get your take on Bill Gates.
So, this is not Bill Gates specific. This is like a general billionaire call out. Again, shout out to me never getting a job at a foundation. But so what I find kind of problematic, and then I guess maybe this is because I'm not a billionaire, but I just wish they put their resources more into like a pool that then could go towards needs as opposed to going towards like personal projects sometimes. Like, Gates Foundation is an exception, I would say, right? Like,
Really? Okay.
I mean, they do like massive funding and research for mostly health-related issues, which is like, generally good, on board, benefits everyone. But I just think it's similar in the same way, right? Like, most of these, not that all billionaires have foundations, but those that do.
Oh, not Jeff Bezos calling you out, you fucking selfish piece of shit.
But, like, again, it's the same thing. They're, like, prescriptive, right? So I know Bill Gates says he wants to, I don't remember how much money it is, but they want to finish the funds, what is it, in the next 20 years?
20 years, yeah.
I mean, if they can do it, I would say, like, chapeau, but I'm not sure that they can. Like, there's a lot of work that goes behind that. And again, I think because of the way a lot of this funding works, it's not as easy, you know, it's not this idea of, like, let's necessarily, like, if he was like, I want to finish this in the next 20 years, and I'm going to extend funding for 1, 2, 3, maybe. But if it's just, like, within your current programming framework, yeah, I would.
Do you want the inside info on him?
Sure. What's he up to?
Gets stuck on the headlights real bad. He has a tit gazing problem.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Did you meet him?
It's from a secondhand source, but it's a very reliable.
It's a reliable one?
It's a source that you actually know. It's a very reliable
Great.
source. The man cannot take his eyes off the headlights.
Well, I've been a little suspicious of him ever since the Epstein connection, where he said I was just asking him for relationship advice, which I'm
again,
like, that is
exactly.
a terrible excuse.
Also, well, yeah, why are we going to him? Like, that's,
For a relationship with a 13-year-old?
yeah, exactly. Like, that's not a good move.
Damn.
Terrible excuse.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Again, all of these, you guys were talking about this in your last episode, but, like, all of these people in this, like, you know, small group of extremely wealthy, privileged men are just, like, I think generally bad news.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Like,
I
I
mean,
can't think of, is there, like,
this
a
idea
good
of, like,
one?
clean, everybody's like, Warren Buffett, you know? I'm like, if you have billions of dollars, there's no fucking way your hands are clean, man. There's just no fucking way. That's a fantasy. And, like, but at least Bill Gates was, like, trying to buy back some karma by donating all that money, whereas Bezos, like, the new
Sure.
Bezos and Musk, these
Right.
new ones, like, they don't even care about humanity. They have no interest in philanthropy. Like, the Carnegie and the Rockefeller
Right.
models have been completely thrown away.
Yeah, and maybe that's, like, to your question, like, maybe it's like, is it better to have, like, those types of models, even if they're, like, specific and a little bit, you know, focused in what they're trying to do, as opposed to just, like, people who are like, no, I have billions of dollars, but I'm just gonna, like, go to the moon every once in a while, and not
gonna
even
go to
just
the moon.
go up in space for a minute or two.
So that leaves us with the Catholic Church.
No, so that, I mean, just to the question, yeah, or do you think they're stepping in big time?
Yeah, no, I doubt it. But they're gonna have to sell off some of their precious artifacts from the Vatican.
I
No
heard
chance.
Their finances are not great right
Yeah, they're gonna have to sell some real estate.
now. Oh, shit.
Oh.
No, I mean, I'm saying if they want to help people.
Right.
Yeah.
You know how much the Catholic Church asks for money all the time?
I know,
Every
but
Sunday.
They help people with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, but, like, not. So I think the difference is the scale, right? So, like, the U.S. is obviously was one of the largest contributors to, like, humanitarian assistance. You still have, like, Canada, you have the EU, you have Australia,
China
China.
on the up and coming with the
different,
loans.
I mean, in different ways. Even in, like, the Gulf states, there are, like, foundations in, like, Qatar, you know, there's, like, a whole. So it's not that they're. It's just, I think, like, you're not going to get it at scale, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
not going to mirror or mimic what the U.S. government previously funded. And I think, you know, for me, the main problem in general is, like, obviously, I think there's a lot of change that's needed, more broadly speaking. But if you just shut everything down, right? Like,
the
it's-
way they did it was so irresponsible.
Right.
Like food rotting in
yeah,
warehouses.
medicine sitting, like, not
Yeah.
able to finish vaccination campaign, like, you know, stuff where you're just like, this is so, it is irresponsible, and it's also ignorant, right? Like, you can shut something down in a way, it doesn't mean everyone's going to be happy, but you can shut something down that also leaves room potentially for things to restart or continue in a different way. But when you're just like, tomorrow everything is off, it's like, this is.
Like people receiving medical treatment just stops in the middle of things. Like
There were stories of, like, people providing vaccines to children, getting, like, you know, in, like, a remote location, getting information that they had to stop while there was, like, lines of children waiting to receive vaccines. Like, imagine, like, you're like
Yeah.
you're like telling the mom, like, hey, sorry, you're, like, number 13. I had to stop at 12.
good luck with
Yeah.
smallpox.
Exactly. See you.
Also, like, good luck with people ever trusting American-made vaccines in the future. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
I think it's more just, again, like, this is where there is this issue of, like, you know, I don't think humanitarians and humanitarian assistants should like need to be seen or as like loved or revered by the communities that they're assisting, but they can do a lot of good in supporting, right?
I imagine this is going to undermine trust that maybe had already been a bit tenuous.
Yep. And definitely in certain communities that was the case, right? Like the famous, it's like one of my favorite stories, right? But like Osama bin Laden was found in Pakistan and they confirmed that it was his house through a vaccine campaign.
Really?
Yeah, and they took DNA from the children and that's how they confirmed.
From his children? And this was like a USAID program, or?
That I don't know, but it was a humanitarian
Catherine Bigelow shit
vaccine
right there.
campaign
Sam.
for polio, if I remember correctly. We might have to cut this, honestly, just because, like...
Oh, is that classified?
No, it's not, but it's... But that, I mean, that is how Osama bin Laden was found. And again, that, like, speaks to also, like, how, like, there is this closeness of humanitarian assistance
son.
and political... Like,
That's-
that's a problem for me, obviously.
Yeah.
And that, but like that undermined, like then they like couldn't do vaccines in Pakistan for years because everyone was like,
Yeah,
like,
but are you trying to kill us?
right, like then like you know these like special forces came in and like killed a bunch of children in this house also, right? Like I mean they didn't just kill Osama bin Laden, so
Yeah. And I think this narrative of like, well, why are we taking care of people in other country when we should be taking care of the American people is so disingenuous, because it's like this big, beautiful bill, like it's cutting all of these services for American people. It's cutting social services like Medicare and Medicaid. And then, you know, like the tax structure is only going to benefit people who make like over, I don't know, $50,000 a year. And then people below that are going to get tax increases.
right.
So it's like, just say that you don't give a fuck about people in other countries. Don't pretend like it's for the concern of the American people.
Right, and this is like this has always been part of the case too, right? Again, you can do both. Like you can have better services for people here and participate in like let's say a broader humanitarian objective. Like you don't have to choose in a country like the US, like they don't have to choose. They are choosing obviously and making
Right.
terrible choices, but like we should be able to have better services, I agree, for people in this country, but it doesn't mean
Doesn't
you're
mean we
not-
can't give to others and love our neighbors.
To answer your first question, I think that, and your question about what we owe the suffering of others, I think that's like the point of life. And I think if you're a person who only cares about yourself and your own personal gain, you lose your mind, like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. You become, it's like selling your soul to the devil, like, you know.
What is it?
You end up on Jeffrey Epstein's island because you just like keep like you're an addict searching for the next thing.
Gain the whole world and sell your soul.
Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth.
That's right.
on just like community, right? Like look after each other a little bit, you know, like it makes it's better, like it improves your life, it improves their lives, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, for me it's like I agree with you, Sarah, because I think it's like how you live in the world, right? Like for me it's like it's almost so obvious the question is, I'm like that's just like how human beings are supposed to function. It's like with each other and in support of each other.
So do you think people should call their representatives and tell them to like fight to reinstate funding for USAID?
It's not that I'm against, like I loved calling congresspersons generally when I have feelings. It's like fun to leave a voicemail. So I think that's still a good thing to do. But I also think, you know, to be super frank, it's going to be kind of like just like a rough road for the years of this administration for humanitarian assistance and U.S. assistance abroad.
So maybe it's about like building a conversation around what we owe others, you know?
Yeah, and what are different ways of doing that type of work, right? Because I do think, like, the reflection that the former ambassador to the AU was sharing, like, that's a real thing. And there's a lot of other issues with how this type of assistance is provided. So, you know, maybe in like a sunnier way, you're like, oh, is it good that everything gets shut down so then you get like kind of a refresh or a restart? I mean, I don't think so, because in that interim period, there's just a lot of
Mass
people,
death.
yeah, just losing access to services that, you know, can help them survive.
Do you have any charities you feel like are worth donating to if you're looking abroad?
Yeah, so, okay, I do, but I'm not sure I want to.
Okay, that's fine.
It's only because I mean, I would say if there's like certain issues that you feel strongly about, like whether that's like related to like women's access to health or like education or like, then I can like also help like point you in good directions. But otherwise, I think I'm just going to be sort of like doing like promos for organizations that I know and like, which like
Totally.
But the point is like where there's a will, there's a way. So it's maybe about raising the consciousness of people to believe that like, yeah, loving thy neighbor and being in service to others is like how we live a deeply satisfying life. So we can do that. You're laughing
No,
at
I
me.
just love your little speeches. You're like, are you hearing the voice of Malcolm X right now?
No, that is not. No.
that's only white double specific.
Yeah, literally. I just sometimes I feel moved by the spirit of the Lord.
No,
you
and I love
know?
it.
Yeah, so find your local like Holy Ghost within yourself to help others, you know, that still small voice telling you that other people's lives matter, you know?
Yeah. Do you have hope?
I still do, and yeah, and I think, but like what you just said, I agree with, right? Like I think like it doesn't always have to be like grand acts or statements, but I do think finding ways to like build community and also build, it's like a term I don't love, but like solidarity with groups that even if it's not one that you're like in or access to, but like may benefit from some support without taking over their space is a good thing to do.
I have another thing, but it's not from Malcolm X. It's from some preacher, I don't remember, but he talks about, he's like, we are the only hands that God has. We are God's hands. So go out into the world and do that work, you know, for your others, for the community, and ultimately then for yourself and saving your own soul.
Amen.
Amen.
I guess, is it time to say?
Well, do you have any, do you have a summer motto? Is that putting you on the spot?
Yeah, I wish I had a summer motto, but I don't have one yet.
Somebody told me it's Irish Boy Summer, and I was like, I
What
think
is
that's
that?
a little self-serving.
Is it being, were they an Irish boy who said that? Yeah, that is self-serving.
Oh, I thought it was like find an Irish boy to like have a love affair with.
I thought it was like being pale and drinking.
Interpret how you will. Irish boy summer.
Love to all my Irish comrades, obviously. Many.
Well, thank you so much, Vicky. This
Thank
was
you.
so
Thanks for
wonderful.
having me.
Interesting.
Thank you.
We'd love
So
to have you
great.
back on any
Yeah,
time.
totally.
This was really informative.
I have
and-
opinions about pretty much anything.
We
Maybe that's
love
my summer
opinions.
motto.
We love women
Yeah.
with opinions.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for.
Cool. Well, class dismissed. See you next time. Bye.
Johnny.